Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Barry Erickson and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight we are delighted to bring you mammoths in our midst. We will learn how this Ice Age mammal lived and how it was discovered in the middle of suburban DuPage County. Dave Andrusyk is a naturalist with the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County at Fullersburg Woods Nature Education Center in Oak Brook. He brings a wealth of knowledge about natural areas management and geographic information systems to his more than 20-year career with the agency. He is a certified interpretive guide by the National Association for Interpretation. He enjoys teaching about fossils, plants, and geocaching, especially to Boy Scouts and other public groups. With so much expertise and fascinating information to provide, I'm anxious to turn the mic and screen over to you, Dave. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Barry. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming and attending this talk. I saw some names on there that I recognize. So hello to all of you, and then hello to everyone else. It's a pleasure to be here to be able to speak with all of you. As Barry mentioned, I work for the Forest Preserve District, DuPage County. I work out of Fullersburg Woods in Oak Brook, but you can find me usually in just about any of the preserves throughout the year. So, and luckily, you know, the Forest Preserve, our trails have been open all year round. So when you have a chance, feel free to go out and check out our trails. Our programming is going, it's going strong, and we have a lot of online programs that we're going to be throwing out there, especially in the new year. And then our in-person programs will be coming along as well. So if you ever have any interest in checking out what programs we do, feel free to check us out on our website, which is www.dupageforest.org. And I'm going to get this screen share started. So hold on one second. All right. So first off, I just wanted to start off by letting you know that this presentation is a lot of photos, and I want to focus on your focus on the pictures. So in a little bit, you're going to see my picture disappear, just so you can have the focus on the cool images that I have to share with you. I am not an archaeologist, not a paleontologist, but I am a naturalist. And I have the pleasure to present to all of you some stories about 3 local prehistoric discoveries here in DuPage County, which I think is very awesome. So throughout the presentation, I will be pausing to receive some of your questions. So as a question pops in your head, feel free to jot that into the Q&A, and Barry will be monitoring that, and we'll be able to stop and talk about your questions as we go along. All right, so in the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County, our mission is to acquire and hold lands for the purpose of preserving the flora, fauna, and scenic beauty for the education, pleasure, and recreation of DuPage County citizens. And this, the big part, is being able to talk with all of you and educate you about some of the historical parts of DuPage County. So some of you might recognize this first picture of Shawnee National Forest, and you're probably thinking to yourself, why is he starting off with a picture of the Shawnee National Forest? That's not in DuPage County. I don't know if any of you have been here, but if you haven't, it's definitely a place to check out, because it is in Illinois, but it certainly does not look like Illinois. And it is said that at one time, all of Illinois used to look like this. But it certainly does not look like this in DuPage County. Well, the reason for that is over time, our landscape has dramatically changed. And a long time ago, and we're talking way back to 225 million years ago, our land masses were a completely different thing. And you can see on the slide here, I have the word Pangea. And you all can say that out loud just to practice saying it. But Pangea is actually landmass that consisted of all of the continental plates that were all connected. And over time, these land masses and plates separated and moved around the planet. Hence, the earthquakes that we still feel is our continental plates moving. So they're still moving today. So at one point, the North American plate moved up so far north that the climate became really, really cold. And also, there was at one point too, the northern part of the continental plate was underwater. So I always have kids talk to me at my geology camp that I do, and they always ask me, why do we never find dinosaurs in this area? And the reason is that when you look at the fossils and things that are out in the limestone and that, we are finding fossils of sea life. So that tells us that at one point, this part of Illinois was actually underwater. But then it did rise and went up towards the poles, actually. And you can see in this picture here how North America is pretty high up on the globe. That was when the Ice Age was happening. And the Ice Age happened during the Pleistocene epoch, and that ranged from about 2,580,000 years ago to about 11,700 years ago. Now, there were at least 4 different ice ages or glaciations. So the glaciation was a period of a glacier that came through this area. And there are 4 major glaciers that came through. The last one is the most significant one because that was the glacier that formed the landscape that we see today. And that was called the Wisconsin Glacier. And the Wisconsin glaciation happened about 12,000 years ago. And if you ever wondered how thick that ice was, well, it was thick enough that it was about a little over a half a mile thick. And you can see in this graphic here, if you were to put a half a mile of ice on top of the city of Chicago, that's how it would look. So it kind of dwarfs a lot of our tall buildings, including the Willis Tower. So glaciers, the way they work is like they're giant bulldozers. So if you picture a bulldozer pushing a bunch of material, it piles up in front of it. And that pile is what we call a moraine. Now, also, if you picture taking your hand and squishing a ball of clay, eventually that clay is going to ooze out from the sides of your hand. So the moraines or hills that form on the side of the glacier, they call terminal moraines. And in DuPage County, we have 3 main moraines that come through the county. And those moraines actually have large ridges that go along them that have created rivers. And you might be aware that in DuPage County, we have 3 big or good-sized rivers that come through us. Along the West Chicago Moraine, which is on the west side of the county, is the West Branch DuPage River. In the middle of the county is the larger moraine that's called the Valparaiso Moraine. And in the county, it's kind of broken up into little pieces here, but it's there. If you're driving west on Route 63 or Hobson Road, and you come up to Route 59, you'll notice you're on a steep incline. And that's the Valparaiso Moraine you're sitting on. And then on the very eastern side is the Tinley Moraine that Salt Creek goes along. So Tinley Moraine has Salt Creek, Valparaiso has the East Branch DuPage River, and West Chicago has the West Branch DuPage River. And once all these ice sheets melted and started to melt away, what followed were marshes and wetlands. And the vegetation that grew in this area were things like firs, larches, and black spruce forests. So this is more like the landscape that you'll find further north, going up into Canada now. But in this area back around the Ice Age, that's what we had over here. So the animals that lived out here in our talk is all about the mammoths and the mastodons. And the mastodons themselves were very primitive elephants. So they are actually had split from the genetic line of, or the mammoths had split from the genetic line of the African and Asian elephants about 1 million years ago. So technically, mammoths are actually closer related to Asian elephants than African elephants are with Asian elephants. So it's kind of interesting. The mammoths have a close connection to the Asian elephants that are still around. Believe it or not, during the Ice Age too, all 4 of those elephants, mammoths, mastodons, and African elephants and Asian elephants, were around at the same time, which is kind of hard to fathom. So, but let's talk about the mammoths specifically. So here's a picture of a woolly mammoth. And I'm sure you can notice some very specific traits about it. Think about what are some things that are obviously different compared to the elephants we see today. So one thing is that it's pretty hairy, isn't it? So mammoths could get up to about 13 feet tall. They weighed up to 10 tons. They are known to have curved tusks, just like this one here, but that was not always the case. So when it came to discovering mammoths and mastodons, you couldn't always rely on the shape of the tusks if they're curved or straight. This guy has very long legs, and they have a hump on their back, but also they have kind of a knob on at the top of their head. Okay. So how is he different from the mastodon? Well, here's a picture of the mastodon. Do you notice some differences? So this mastodon the mastodons were basically smaller. They were about 8 to 10 feet tall. They weighed about 4 to 6 tons. His head is a lot more sloped than the mammoth. He doesn't have that kind of funny knob at the top of his head either. He does have a little bit of a hump, just like the mammoth does, though. They're definitely shorter and stockier than the mammoths were. One big thing that you can notice about mammoths and mastodons when it comes to identifying their remains is by their teeth. So both the mammoth and the mastodon ate completely different things, which is why their teeth look different. If you look at the mammoth teeth, they actually resemble today's elephants. The African and Asian elephants have very similar teeth because they eat mostly grasses, leaves, and softer vegetation. The mastodon, however, they lived more in the woody areas where there was a lot of trees. So they spent a lot of their time eating branches, twigs, leaves, and probably roots as well. So what happens if you don't see the teeth? What if you find remains of a mammoth or a mastodon? You know it's a large animal, but you don't have the teeth or the skull to clue you in on what it is. What scientists have discovered is that you can look at the vertebrae or the backbone. So this hole where the spinal cord or spinal column would go through is different between the two elephants. So the mammoth has a triangular hole in it, whereas the mastodon has more of a gumball shaped hole in the vertebrae. So that's another clue that scientists can use to discover whether they have found a mammoth or a mastodon. So what really happened to the mammoths? What happened to the mastodons? Why don't we see them walking down the streets? Well, here's some thoughts of what might have happened to them. Could it be that they lost their habitat? Were there changes on the planet that reduced the food sources or made it harder for them to survive? Was it disease? Did something out there kill only just a certain species and not the others that are still around today? That's what makes it so hard to understand, because if African and Asian elephants were out there, if there was a disease out there that killed the mammoths, why didn't it kill them, the Asian and African elephants? Humans coming into the area, did humans kill them off into extinction? So there have been remains that have been found with evidence of butchering of mammoths and mastodons. So did humans kill them off and kill them off into extinction? The fourth question I got here is, was it environmental changes? Was it the change of the temperature from a colder to a warmer climate? And these elephants had a lot of fur on them. Did that make it so they had a harder time surviving? There's some important questions that I don't know if we really know the answers to yet or not. At this point, I'm going to pause and say, Barry, do you have any questions at all?
No, there aren't any questions yet, although it's a good time to go ahead and remind people that if you have questions, go ahead and pop that Q&A window open and enter them there. Yeah, so I think maybe we can go ahead.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm here to illustrate to you all some stories about the discoveries that have happened here in DuPage County, because I think it's really awesome that here in DuPage County we have discovered prehistoric life. I'm going to start with the Perry mastodon, which was discovered in 1963, and it was found what's now property of Churchill Woods. If you look down to the bottom left, you see a red spot there, and that's where the Perry mastodon was found, at Churchill Woods. Churchill is in the Lombard Lombard area, excuse me, and see this road here is St. Charles Road, and then we have 355, and then Crescent Boulevard goes around the railroad tracks. It goes through Downers Grove and Lombard. So on October 16th, 1963, United States Federal District Court Judge Joseph Sam Perry was in the process of constructing a pond in the backyard of his house. The excavator that was digging pulled out a large bone in its bucket. So immediately he stopped the digging and he called two professors at Wheaton College to come in and investigate. Cyril Luckman, a biology professor, and Douglas Block, a geology professor, both recognized this large bone as a femur bone from a fossilized elephant. Further investigation revealed that there were more bones in that area, so Judge Perry allowed the college to excavate the site and to study and display the bones. The bones were dug out as fast as possible, and they didn't keep records of the location the position of the bones, how they were positioned in the ground, or where exactly they were in that area. It was told to me that Judge Perry kind of gave the crew a time limit to remove the bones so he could get this pond built. So apparently he had given them about 8 to 10 or 7 to 8 days to be done. So they did it as quick as they could. In all, 115 bones were discovered, and the majority of them were large bones. They even found a skull, and this is a picture of the jaw. And on the skull and the jaw revealed the teeth, which, as you might remember, they could use the teeth to identify it. So they were able to identify it as a Mastodon americanus, which is the American mastodon. So the bones were actually given to Wheaton College to be studied and displayed, and they actually wrapped all the bones in a plaster, and they called it a plaster jacket to protect it when it was traveling over to Wheaton College. Before they left, the final picture was taken of Judge Perry and his wife, and you can see Dr. Block on the left-hand side shaking Judge Perry's hand. Overall, about 41% of the skeleton was recovered. So it was less than half of the skeleton itself. And it consisted of 115 bones and fragments. They determined that this mammoth died 10,980 years ago. So here's a picture of how the mammoth was displayed. Since they actually recovered more of the bones on the left side, in the picture it looks like the right side, but it's the left side of the mammoth or mastodon. So they made the exhibit a two-toned exhibit. So they made a fiberglass model of the mastodon and one side, and then the skeleton on the other. The left side did not have all the bones though. So they had to do some bone casts from other museum specimens and some clay models of the bones on the right side to display them on the left side. Now, if you think back to the pictures I showed you of the mammoth and the mastodon, can you notice something a little odd about this guy? Did you notice the tusks? So in the picture I showed you, the mastodon had more straight tusks and the mammoth had curved tusks. But this mastodon, oddly enough, had curved tusks. So you couldn't always rely on the curved or the straight tusks to determine whether you had a mastodon or a mammoth, but the teeth gave it away. So this display was dedicated to its location in Armadillo Hall in 1975. They did find out when they were really looking at the bones too that both of the right legs were broken on this mammoth. So they think that it might have fallen into a ditch and broke both of its legs and was kind of stuck and ended up dying there in that pit. This mammoth, or mastodon, excuse me, was later moved in 2010 to the Myers Science Center in over at Wheaton College. So that was moved in 2010. So, and that's where it is today. Also, the original site that this mammoth or mastodon, I keep going to mammoth for some reason. The original site where this mastodon was found was purchased by the Forest Preserve District in 1995. And you can still kind of see that area if you drive down Rifford Road in between St. Charles Road and Crescent Boulevard. You'll see in between where the homes are, you can see a lake out there, and that's the general area of where that was found. All right, and I'm going to pause here, Barry, and see if we have any questions at all.
Yes, we did definitely have a couple of questions come in. So one is, how many bones did the mastodon or mammoth usually have?
That's a great question, and I unfortunately don't know that answer, so I will jot that one down so I can give you that.
Okay. And another question is, did mammoths and mastodons evolve from the same elephant, or did they have some maybe background in common?
Yeah, so they came from the same genetic line. So the mastodon actually came before you saw the mammoths in that. So the mammoth was actually closer to um, the um, the Asian and African elephants actually in the genetic line. So the mastodons were actually more primitive elephant.
Okay. And another question is, since the bones weren't fossilized, was the DNA extracted?
I don't believe DNA was extracted from these elephants at all. Um, they they did preserve the bones, and I don't know how this one was preserved. I can clue you in a little bit more about the next one that we're going to talk about, how they were preserved. But yeah, there's a lot of the bones from these guys were not rock like your typical dinosaur bones. And part of it has to do with where they were found.
Hmm. Hmm. Great. And there was a question about the Columbian mammoths, if you have any information about that.
I don't have any specific information about Columbian mammoths. I don't know for sure if they're among the mammoths that have been found in this area. Um, so unfortunately, I don't know that answer, but I can check on that and get back to you on that one as well.
Hmm. Great. Thank you. And someone was referring back to the map of the glaciers and the moraines. They noted the Blue Island in southern Cook County, and they were wondering if that's how Blue Island got its name.
Uh, I, to be honest, I don't remember the. I do recall a story about the how Blue Island got its name, but honestly, I don't know the answer to that. That's another great question, and I will look into that one as well.
No problem. All right. And another question is, was there evidence of the right side having been eaten, and perhaps that's why it was missing?
I don't believe there was evidence of it being eaten at all. A lot of times um, a lot of times for these bones and everything to be preserved, one of the steps is that they have to be covered pretty quickly. So, and usually that's usually covered by mud, which seems to be a common factor with the discoveries that were found around here, which we'll get into a little bit later as well. But I did not read anything about any mention of these being chewed on or not. But it's a chance that some of them could have been yanked away by a predator, and that might be why they couldn't find them.
Sure, sure. And there's kind of a follow-up question to what you were saying. Someone asks, did the animal need to fall or end up in water or soil in order to be preserved?
Uh, yeah. So in order for an animal to become a fossil, um, you do have, unfortunately, you have to die first. But you have to die in the right spot, which is why we don't find fossils everywhere, because you have to be in the right conditions. And a lot of times the conditions involve like a mud pit, a tar pit, or something that's going to cause your body to be covered rather quickly. And then as decomposition breaks down all of the fleshy material, your bones are very porous. And so minerals actually dissolve into those pores. And as the bone decomposes away, the minerals in that soil will actually become rock. And that's how a lot of the bones of like dinosaurs are, that it's basically the bone that's been replaced by rock. So these, however, are the real bone itself. They haven't been replaced by rock, but they were basically submerged in a mud that bacteria was not in, and could not get through to cause that decomposition to happen.
Okay. And another question is, since mammoths and mastodons seem to live in different ecosystems or climate conditions, were they living in this area at the same time, or was there an interval in time between them?
They believe that they were both here at the same time.
Okay. All right. And someone's asking, what were the predators for them?
There were different different carnivores that did live in the area. So I don't know if any remains have been found of them, but there could have been things like you see pictures of like the saber-toothed tigers and some other predatory animals. The dire wolves, I know, were in this area too. The larger wolves that could have taken on a mammoth that was injured or incapacitated in some way.
Okay. And just one last question before we let you move on to the next section of the presentation. Is the public able to view the exhibit at Wheaton College?
I believe, yes. Yeah, I think this is in one of the halls that has public access. If you check out the Wheaton College's website, I think they have the hours. And I don't know with our pandemic situation if that is accessible right now, but I know that it is in a place where public could come and view it.
Great, great. Thank you. I think it's all of our questions for now. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll keep moving right along. All right. So the next mammoth or elephant that we are going to talk about is the Blackwell Mammoth that was discovered in 1977. So again, on this map, you can see the location of the Blackwell Mammoth. It was discovered in the area that's now McKee Marsh. And Blackwell, if you're not familiar with, is in Warrenville. It's just to the east of Route 59. This road here is Mack Road. And just to the east over on this side that you can't see is Winfield Road. And to the south end of the preserve is Butterfield Road. So this is just the north section of the preserve, and there's a whole lot more to the preserve that's south of Mack Road as well. So actually, all right. So on this late 1970s, actually, I'm going to go back to this picture here because I want to show you something here that I forgot about. And in the 1970s, there was actually a leak in Silver Lake. Now, I don't know all the details on what that involved, but this leak was connected to them digging over in this area. This section that's now known as McKee Marsh was one of the Forest Preserve District's first major restoration projects. And that project was started in the 70s. And because of this leak, they decided that they would come over here and start digging into the soil to bring that over to the lake to patch the leak that was happening. So Gary Jones who is a heavy equipment operator, was given the job of digging up clay for this project. Lucky him. Now, this is in June. So this is on June 21st. And it was already a hot day. And he went out there in the morning to do his project and chose the spot to do the digging. And the spot that he picked could have been anywhere, but there was one cottonwood in that field at the time, and it was a large cottonwood. And so, since it was a hot, sunny day, he decided that that was the place to do the digging. And lo and behold, out of that large field, the one spot he decided to dig at happened to be a spot where he pulled out a very large bone. When he noticed it, he stopped right away and called his supervisor to let him know that he pulled something out of the soil. They did notify naturalists, and the naturalist, from what I have heard, had the same reaction that us naturalists tend to have when people say they discovered something out of the ordinary, where we say, yeah, right. This probably was a cow, or maybe it was a circus elephant that died in the area that we don't know about, but they're a little skeptical. Meanwhile, 3 children were in the same spot. In fact, they were playing on a mound of dirt that Gary had made. And their names were Mark, Kelly, and Rich. And they claim that they had to throw mud clods at Gary to get him to stop digging. Now, Gary claims that he knew that the bone was there, and he stopped right away. Now, I don't know who really are the ones who are telling the truth on this. It's a mystery that I don't know if we'll ever solve, but they were there when that discovery was made. Early the next morning, so this is on June 22nd, it's a Wednesday, the educational staff and some of the scientific staff came out to inspect the area. And upon inspection, they determined that the bones were, yes, of a prehistoric elephant of some kind. And yes, us naturalists sometimes have to admit that we were wrong and we shouldn't have jumped the gun and doubted you, but it happens. So they determined that it was either a mastodon or mammoth, but they weren't sure yet on what it could be. So they contacted some major scientific institutions, a couple museums, a couple colleges, and they were instructed by one or two of these institutions that they were to slowly and carefully uncover the bones without removing anything. Now, what's interesting about this picture is you see the Forest Preserve staff working here, but you can also see the two of the kids. And our public affairs with the Forest Preserve at the time thought it was a really awesome opportunity for these kids to witness science in action. So they actually let these kids hang out and help out with the excavation. This gentleman is naturalist Mike Redditt. And he took time, instead of rushing into it, to actually survey the area and lay out some grid lines to make the study a little bit easier to map out and record data and things of that nature. So, and as they started getting into it, they would use some tools to dig down. But once the bones were exposed, they would have to use their hands to clear off the mud and things. And if you can see in this picture, you can see they are quite muddy because this mud is very wet clay, and it's very sticky. You'll also notice that that hole that they're in had water in it, and they had to actually hook up some pumps to suck the water out, and those pumps ran consistently while they're in the area digging out, because that area was intentionally a marsh. So Mike Reddit was actually a artist as a hobby, I believe, and he took a lot of extra time to draw out placement of bones that they found, and this way they were able to have record of the position of bones and where they were and all of that fun stuff. His artwork that he has drawn, if you remember the very first slide I showed, that my intro slide of a mammoth that was in the water, was his artwork. And his artwork actually can be seen in quite a few of the forest preserve buildings still today. You'll get to see that picture again at the very end. So here you can see the grid lines that they drew or put out. And the grid lines were so they can have established plots to be able to record the locations of the various things.
Dave, you seem to be having a problem with your audio. Is it going okay?
I think so. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now I can.
Okay,
Go
sorry
ahead.
about that.
Great.
You can also see the 3 kids are still out there helping them out. Over on this corner, you can see where there's a scapula or shoulder bone and that femur bone there. The other interesting thing is the grid lines were set at ground level, so you can kind of have an idea of the depth that they had to dig to get down to it. Here's a picture of one of the naturalists who was unearthing that femur bone. And the interesting thing about this picture is that you notice there's like a burlap on there that's wet. They were instructed to cover all the bones with wet burlap to protect them during the day because it was a hot day and they didn't want these bones to dry out. But at night, they would actually just turn off the pumps and the entire hole would fill up with water. This was not only to protect the bones, but also to deter any of the amateur paleontologists from taking their own stab at doing some archaeology. So these bones, as I mentioned before, were not petrified or fossilized at all. Nothing like a dinosaur skeleton. They did notice that there was only a slight deterioration on the bones, so they're pretty well preserved. And it's basically the clay that was allowing, was not allowing any bacteria to get down to the bones themselves. And so that makes this clay the perfect preserving medium for bone, because it actually keeps the bacteria from breaking things down. So on June 23rd, which is a Thursday, a couple days after when it was discovered on Tuesday, Northern Illinois University arrived on the scene. Dr. James Springer of the Archaeology and Anthropology Department and his students came over to help with the dig. And Dr. Springer's goal for this dig was to link the connection of man and the prehistoric elephant. Unfortunately, no human artifacts were found throughout the whole dig. Here's a picture of the telltale vertebrae. Do you remember? Is everybody, can you remember looking at this, what this animal is? If you said mammoth, you got it. So at the time, when they exposed this, they did not know that this was a telltale sign that it was a mammoth. So right now, they're thinking that this was a mastodon. Reason for that was the only big find that was in DuPage County previously was the Perry mastodon in the 60s. So that's fresh in their minds. So a lot of them just were assuming at the time that this was a mastodon that they were digging out. Here the news has arrived. So the word got out and news channels came by. Some of you may remember Channel 2 Burley Hines. He's on the left. And then interviewing Dan Gooch there is Channel 7's Jim Gibbons. And since the news broadcasted Friday, June 24th was a beautiful day and brought in the crowds. They said that on the busiest crowded day, they had over 1,000 people show up to the dig site. So they had to put up some lines around the dig site so they keep people back. And they're allowed to come by and watch the action. You'll also notice in these pictures now, once the university arrived, those 3 kids were not allowed on the site at all. Here you can see the crowds in the background, and the university students are out there squaring off the plots and taking pictures, measuring everything before they actually get to start removing the bones. The naturalists took the opportunity, since there were crowds, to do some interpretation, and they started doing programs, impromptu programs for the public that came to visit and see what was going on. So they would talk about what everybody was doing, what was happening out there, and all that fun stuff, and showing some of the artifacts. This picture is one of the examples to show the layout of the mammoth. And this one actually is an older one because you see the kids are still in this one, but it's pointing out that the shoulder blade was on this side, on the left-hand side, and then the spine went kind of on a curve this way, and then the pelvis was found over here. A Pleistocene geologist from Northern Illinois University took some samples to date the age of the soil. And it came back, the results came back after several months, and they determined that the soil was over 15,000 years old. They also had performed a radioactive carbon-14 testing on the bones and found out that the bones themselves were about 13,130 years old. So the studies continued until about July 15th. By this time, they found about 3/4 of the skeleton, and the skull, tusks, and most of the forelegs were never found. The Forest Preserve continued to do some additional digs in various places around McKee Marsh, but did not find a thing. So at this point, they kind of said, we found all we could find. For now, we're done. The bones were packed up and they were sent to NIU, their archaeology lab. And there they preserved the bones and they studied them even further. The preservation was a lot different. What they did was they used a substance that was almost equivalent to your everyday Elmer's glue. And they coated them with this coating that basically was used to preserve the bones themselves. And during this time is about when they brought the bones back to the university. This is when they found out that the triangular shape in the vertebrae is a telltale sign that this was a woolly mammoth. Eventually, that skeleton was brought to Fullersburg Woods to be put on display, and it was laid out in our older visitor center, which is now our resource center here at Fullersburg Woods. And excuse me, the way it was laid out was in the exact same position as it was when it was found. So I put in the photo that I showed earlier so you can kind of get an idea. And yes, it's upside down to show you how it matches that shape. So the pelvis, and there it is right there is the pelvis. And then there goes the spine. Here's the spine. And the shoulder blade is right up here. And that's where the shoulder blade was in the picture. So they matched how it was laid out in the field so people can actually see what it would have looked like when they found it. Today, here it is standing up in our visitor center. And this is the view of the left side of the mammoth. Here's the front view. And as you see, most of the front legs were not found. Here's the big femur bone that was in some of the pictures. Whoops. And here's the other side of it. So scientists had determined that this mammoth was, any guesses? Was it a male or a female? How do you know if it's a mammoth is a male or a female is the question? Well, scientists figured out that looking at the pelvic bone, you can see cracks in it. And they say that this is evidence that this was a female who had stress fractures in her pelvic bone, and that's evidence that she had at least one birth in her life. The age of the mammoth is said to be, from what they could tell from the bones and that, is that it was 30 to 40 years old. Here's that femur bone. There's been some debate about this femur bone. Does everybody see this gouge in it? Of course, any scientist that sees something like that will ask themselves, what's that? And what is that from? So we have one expert that says that this is evidence that the animal was hunted. He believes that the front leg bone was harvested for the marrow. Now, another scientist has come out here and studied the mammoth, and he says the gouge is actually from the backhoe. He stated that the gouge is the same size as the tooth from the backhoe shovel. He actually wrote a report, and his overall statement about our mammoth is this, and this is a quote. It appears this mammoth was in good health, had one calf, and suffered a fall or other injury that resulted in bone lesions to the spine and the sacrum. The animal also had a long-term systemic infection involving the two right ribs, which never really healed, but did not cause great disability. There's no evidence that humans killed or butchered this beast. What do you guys think? So now I'm going to open this up for see if you guys have any questions.
Yes, a few more questions did come in. Thank you. One is someone's asking, just a confirmation, did African and Asian elephants live at the same time as mammoths and mastodons?
Yes. So there is evidence that they were alive at the same time, but not in the same area.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And someone mentions as having gone walking in both of these locations, is there a possibility there are more fossils in this area?
Yes, there's a good chance there could be. You never know until you dig, right? So this one, what the amazing thing about this Pratt's mammoth is that if Gary picked another place to dig, it might still be there. So it's all the luck of the draw of picking the right spot. Just please don't dig in a forest preserve.
Right. Kind of a follow-up question. Someone asks, since the mammoth dig ended, has ground penetrating radar ever been considered to locate more of the skeleton?
I don't think so. I don't recall ever hearing that was anything that they've talked about, but it's a good thought.
Mm-hmm. And does anyone have a guess on where the skull and front legs are?
Your guess is as good as mine. There's some speculation and theory of where they could be. That's something I was going to touch on in the very end too. Skulls are although they seem very heavy, they also have a lot of pores and holes in them from the sinuses and all that. So they technically when it comes to water, are light, and they have actually been known to float away.
Wow.
So it could be in someone's backyard in Warrenville.
Okay. You had that one slide that talked about the age of the soil, and someone is asking, what do they look for, or how do the scientists determine how old the soil is?
That is an awesome question that I don't have an answer to. Um, I'm sure there is a process to do that, and I will check on that and find out what the soil aging process is.
Okay. Another question is, what was the life expectancy of mammoths and mastodons? You mentioned that this one found was about 40.
Yeah, well, they said it was excuse me, about 30 to 40 years old, and I think that for an elephant is getting into like that middle age category, but I don't know for sure what the maximum age was for the mammoths. Unfortunately, sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. And so I'm just kind of scrolling through the questions. Um, Someone is noting that the young girl that was in a number of the pictures still lives in Warrenville. Interesting.
Yes, one of her brothers actually came by probably about 6 months or so ago to Fullersburg, and he gave us a toe bone from the mammoth that he said he's had a guilty conscience since he took that bone from the dig site, and he finally brought it back to us. So
Wow.
it was kind of funny that he's had it most of his life, and he decided to bring it back. So it's kind of a cute story.
Absolutely. Someone asks, when were the bones raised upright and assembled
So
from the
we
different
in
installations?
2000 at Fullersburg, we did a big renovation. We moved our visitor center from the other building and moved that. The mammoth was actually in this other building laying down still. A lot of kids called it the maze because they walked through like a cave, and you walked around in a down a hallway that turned and twisted. Um, and when they did the renovation, they decided they wanted to have the mammoth standing. So they had another company come in and build a frame and put the bones together in the standing fashion.
Mhm. Great. Okay, there are a couple more questions here, but I think we'll leave those for the end so you can finish
Sure.
up with the information you've got. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so the last mammoth I was going to talk about, which is the third find that was in DuPage County, was the Pratt's Wayne mastodon, actually. And this mastodon was found in the 2005. It was found at Pratt's Wayne Woods. Again, this red dot marks the area where it was found. This map, however, is of James Pate Phillips State Park. And Pratt's Wayne goes up against it. Its north end of the preserve meets up with James Pate Phillips State Park. They're both divided by this ComEd right-of-way that goes around it. To the south is Stearns Road. To the left is Dunham Road. So it's very as far northwest in DuPage County as you can get. In fact, right up here by the Blue Stem Trail is the actual spot where three counties come together. So we got Cook County and Will County and DuPage County. So anyways, so this part of Pratt's Wayne in 2000 was undergoing a massive wetland restoration. It used to be an old ag field or agricultural field. So a lot of agricultural fields in this area have drain tiles in them because when they were being farmed, you couldn't grow corn and soybeans and things like that in fields that were wet. You had to get the water out. So you put in drain tiles underground and they lead up to a waterway and moves the water out. So to restore it, we have to pull those drain tiles out or break them apart so water doesn't collecting them. So the Forest Preserve went through a process where they went and dug all these drain tiles out. And this is what the field looks like now. But this area, they dug pits to test to see if the removal of the drain tiles was working. So they dig the pits, see if there's water accumulating in them, if it's wet, to make sure that this process was working. As they were digging these pits, they did pull out an artifact that was actually a piece of an old larch tree. It was very well preserved, and which kind of sealed the deal on the fact that this area did have larches and black spruce and things like that. They also found evidence of seeds from some of those trees as well. But they buried all those pits and sent a company in 2005 to come in and seed the area with wetland seed. And it was then when the company Applied Ecological Services came across 3 teeth from an animal sitting on the top of one of the pits. Now, looking at this picture, can you guess whose teeth those belong to? And if you said a mastodon, you hit the nail on the head. So these are from a mastodon. There were actually 3 teeth that were found. And there was actually this gentleman, Daniel Terpstra, who was part of the team that found them. So the Forest Preserve did not rush right into a big excavation. And part of the reason was that we really wanted to have the chance to get the community involved in this expedition, or excavation, I should say. And they decided to create a camp for students and teachers to get involved in the actual dig. So it wasn't until 2000 when this camp was kicked off, and they called it Mastodon Camp. And it was in August of 2007, and it was a partnership with the Field Museum, Granger Foundation, and the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. And this camp gave them all the opportunity to be part of a real scientific excavation of a mastodon. And these students spent the very first week over at the Field Museum going through training on the history of mammoths and mastodons and the prehistoric life, and then looking at all the different things that they would have to do this excavation. Their first day in the field was on August 3rd, 2007. So you can imagine how hot an open field is in August. So every morning they'd have to bring out these tents, set them up, and then take them out to the site. Here they are setting up their grid, and here's some of the Forest Preserve staff getting that ready. And this gentleman, his name is Dr. Scott Demmel, and he's with the Field Museum. And the students that came to this had to interview for the opportunity to be a part of this project. So they had to fill out an application, have like a face-to-face interview with organizers, and they had to kind of earn that opportunity to be in this this excavation. In total, they had 40 students and 10 teachers participating. So this picture is of Brendan, who did the first dig into the soil. And the first dig revealed some bone shards. So basically what the students would do is they would cut about 10 centimeters into the soil, and all the soil would get sifted so that way they wouldn't miss any of these little shards and things if there were any shards there. And I was told that throughout the camp, they would actually find bits and pieces of tusk and bone every 15 minutes. So here's Scott Demmel showing the soil profile. And what's really interesting is this is evidence that this is truly a wetland soil, because on the top is the farm soil. So this is the topsoil that was being farmed. But underneath is the clay. You can see the clay is quite evident. So each plot that they had was a 2 meter by 2 meter area, and it was delineated by a string grid. And they are all labeled with this information. So it says PWW MC07, which is Pratt Wayne Woods, Mastodon Camp 2007, Unit 4. So each unit had its own designated number. Level 1 means this is the first level that they've dug down. So this is between 10 and 0 centimeters, or 0 to 10 centimeters. So it's level 1. So the next 10 would be level 2, and so on and so forth. They also had a graph that they would have to fill out for each level. And if they found anything large in size, that they could sketch the location of it. This allowed them to have evidence of where that bone was and what its shape and direction was. So this is the other job that they had, is they had to sift through all that soil that was dug out. So this is the sifter that they would use. They would put the material in there, and this girl in the green would shake it, and the other two would pull out any of the artifacts they would see. If they found artifacts, they would put them in a bag that was labeled with that same information of what unit was and what level it was at and all that fun stuff. Whoops. So here you can see a picture of all of them working hard and digging. So all the students were assigned a certain section that they would work in. Here you can see a object that was found. And I was told that interesting aspect is that it was very difficult for them to determine or figure out whether what they were pulling out was a bone shard or if it was a tusk piece. And one of the methods that they would use was what was called the tongue test. And they said that if you touched your tongue to it and it stuck like you were licking an ice cube, it was one, and if it didn't, it was the other. Now, I apologize because the person that told me this could not remember which was which. So I'll have to leave you in suspense on that one. But kind of interesting. I don't know if I'd be interested in licking a bone or a tusk, to be honest. When their day was done, they would cover each pit with these boards. And one of the reasons why they would cover it was, one, to keep people from going in there, and two, because the next day they would have to bail. And if they covered it, it was a little bit easier because it was raining that day. So they didn't have the convenience of having a pump to pump the water out, because they had several different plots as well. So they'd actually have to get a fire line and bail the water out. The second day was not a good day for them because there was a storm. I was told by one of the naturalists that was there that they noticed this cloud coming in, and so they called law enforcement. And law enforcement said, "Oh, we forgot you guys are out there. There's a tornado warning." So they had to pack out of there really quickly. They went to the James Fay Phillips State Park building, and they sheltered there for while the storm was going on, and then they called it a night or a day for that day. When they came back, it was even more flooded, so they had to bail all that out. And then they were back at it again. So you'll see now there is a fence around the area, because part of this project was to involve the community and involve the public. So they are going to be inviting the public to come by to see this process. And they set up a tent in the front, which is kind of the greeting area. Folks would come in there, check in, get introduced to what was going on, and they'd be given the rules of what they could and could not do. And then they would be directed over to where the dig was happening. All right, here you can see them digging, but you can notice that they're a little bit further down. Here's a picture of a couple of the student teachers and a student. The teachers are on this side. This is Ann Covert from Naperville May Watts Elementary School. And then Meredith Lannon is from St. Charles North High School. The students that were here were were all high school students that were participating in the dig. The other interesting thing is, if you notice the tools that they have there, they would use the trowels and the dustpans to dig the soil out. They had to be careful because they didn't want to break anything that they found that was in there. So they had to use the smaller tools to do it and do it by hand. They dug deep enough that it was more comfortable for some of them to actually lay down on the boards to reach their study plot. And here you can see public has come to view. And we had crowds coming out every day and on the hour. And one of the cool things that these students got to do was they not only got to do the digging, but they also had to do the interpretation, where they would walk over to the public that was here and teach everybody about what they were doing, what they were finding, and about some of the things that they found. So they would show artifacts. They would actually show let the kids and the folks hold the teeth and feel them and get the weight of them and things like that. At the time this was happening, my kids were little. And I remember bringing my kids over here for them to check it out. And that's one of my son's fondest memories, was being able to hold the mastodon teeth. So here's some more of them speaking to the public. What I really like about this picture is look how muddy and dirty they are. This clay is not friendly. These kids left this place looking like they took a bath in the mud. So, and that was one common factor of all these finds, is that it was very wet and muddy. They did have rules for the folks. Apparently, you're not supposed to feed them. I'm not sure what happened if you fed them, but that was one of the rules. And here's some of the things that they found. This is a piece of a rib bone. Here is a tusk piece. Here she's holding also a piece of a tusk. And here is a piece of a bone. And a piece of a tusk. Now, as we went through those, I don't know about you. Now, I had one of the naturalists that was here at the time explain each of these pictures to me, and he told me what they were. And as I go through them, I even have a hard time telling the difference between the bone and the tusk. So anyways, on August 10th was the last day, and they closed up all the holes and had a big party and all. But one thing that they did do is when they were closing the holes, they left a 2007 penny in each hole. And the reason for that was to indicate to anyone in the future that was digging in that area that it's already been dug. One of the teams left a note in their hole, and I'll read it to you. It says, "Dear future digger, congrats. You have found our letter buried in our trench. I'm sorry to say, however, that there was never anything to find in the small 2-meter by 50-centimeter area. But there is some very nice dirt. If you are here looking for the remains of a mastodon, please insert this letter back in the hole, bury it, and please try again. Thank you and have a nice life." Apparently, it was written by high schoolers. So So the Field Museum took all the artifacts back to the museum, where they're all cataloged, computerized, and recorded. And I believe they are all still over there at the museum. The Forest Preserve does have um, uh, 2 of the teeth that were found in our archives as well. So some conclusions I have from these discoveries. There's a lot of different things you can come out thinking about from all these different discoveries that have happened here in DuPage County. But these are some of my thoughts about this. Number one is that most of these discoveries were found near or in wet areas. And it makes you wonder. So if you know that softer vegetation can be found near water. So if animals are older and they're having a hard time with eating their foods, or maybe they're injured, have some sort of ailment, maybe water is the place to go to. And that's where you end up perishing, but you have something there soft that you can still eat. The other thing is that moving water can carry away bones from many animals and deposit the bones in a similar washout point or in a similar area. So maybe this mastodon at Pratt's Wayne were fragments and things that washed out from another location, and that's why they didn't really find much. Maybe that's where this head of our Blackwell Mammoth went, or the other parts of the perimastodon went off to somewhere other location where someone else found the other half of the perimastodon. Who knows? So I'm at the point where what I'd like to do is get your thoughts. What do you think? How well? What other conclusions did you come up with as we went through this? Also, if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to try to answer some of those.
Great, thank you so much, Dave. There are a couple questions as people are formulating their thoughts and ideas. I'll go ahead and read some of those out for you. Going back to the find that's displayed at Fullersburg Woods, the crack in the femur, could that have been a stress fracture, they wonder?
It could be. So the weird thing about that femur was that it was, more than just a crack. It was like a big gouge in it. It's on display at Fullersburg if you ever want to see it. Once, unfortunately, right now our building is closed, but hopefully we'll be opening it in the new year and you could come in and check it out. But it definitely, you could literally put your fist into that gouge. So it's interesting that, professionals who are paleontologists that study this sort of thing can't even agree on what that is. So it is a big mystery.
Right, absolutely. And someone else is asking about that same site. Have there been any plans on making fake bones in order to complete the skeleton?
I could tell you we have talked about it. That's pretty much as far as we got. We really pride ourselves in the fact that skeleton that you're seeing is it. There's nothing there that is been modeled or remade. That's the real thing. And I think that's really cool for kids and families to see. So we have talked about it is lacking. It'd be cool to also have the skull. We've talked about maybe possibly seeing about having a skull fabricated just to make it look as massive as it really is, because you kind of lose it. You kind of lose how big it really is without having the head on there.
Right, right. Someone is asking you. In one of the photographs, there was that long instrument that showed all of the layers of the soil, and they're wondering what that instrument is called.
It's basically, I don't remember the exact name of it, but it's basically a soil probe. So you push down into the soil with it, and then you turn it, and then you pull it back up, and it shows you that profile of the soil. That one was actually a short one. There's some that are so much longer that you can get a bigger picture of the profiles of that soil. And that can tell a lot of soil scientists a lot about the history of the area based on the soil layers.
Right. Okay. And someone is asking, why why were the tusks and bones so shattered?
Your guess is as good as mine. There could be many reasons for that. My suspicion is that these shards and bits and pieces maybe were bouncing around in the water, and this is where they were deposited. Um, so um, so maybe in the process of floating down a stream, they're broken into pieces. So yeah, unfortunately, there were not very many large pieces of bone or tusk that were found. There was a section. I take that back. There was a good sized piece of tusk that they did find. Unfortunately, I did not have a picture of that to show you, uh, but um, um, but that and the teeth were pretty much it.
Okay. Is there any signage at that site?
Not at the Pratt's Wayne site. Access to that site is actually very difficult because the intention was to make that into a wetland, which is really important for our ecosystems and the wildlife in that area. So there has not been a trail constructed over there. It's kind of difficult to get at, um, but it's there.
It was such a fascinating story about how the public was brought in order to participate. Someone is asking, has there been anything written about this particular dig and how it took place?
I don't think there have been any books written about them. There have been some naturalists that wrote some articles and papers on it. There have been some studies done. So there's some reports and studies out there too. Um, but I know specifically for the Blackwell Mammoth, there have been a few studies where the Blackwell Mammoth was a part of. So there are bigger studies about the mammoths in this area. So
Mhm. Someone's asking who owns the site dig contents, what was found? Is that the Field Museum?
so it's a good question. The for the Pratt's Wayne mastodon, that one it was a partnership between the Field Museum and since the Forest Preserve, we don't really have a good place for all that. I think the Field Museum has that just so they have the ability to keep it all safe and preserve it. So they have that, I believe. Um, the Because like we don't have a complete skeleton, there really I don't think was much interest in having any museums having it because like I had mentioned in the beginning, there were well over 100 some finds of mammoths and mastodons in this area alone. So I think the museums kind of like having the full thing, and I only having one or two is enough. So
Right. So are those pieces, I'm guessing that they're not on display. The
no,
Field
I
Museum just has them in their,
no, I don't think they have them on display. I think they just have them in their archive storage.
right, right. Okay. Someone is asking, how does one ensure the bones on display do not degrade?
I
Does,
believe part of it, and I don't know everything about preservation and how things are preserved or and that, but I do know that like in some like archival storage, you have it the climate controlled, and you have it, and that they could have them protected in some way. So yeah, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I do know that they have a way of preserving things like that and keeping them from disintegrating.
right. Uh, Someone is asking where you found all of those amazing old forest preserve photos going all the way back, how those are archived or where those can be seen.
Well, it's been a chore to gather all those. So, and there's more. You only saw a handful of them. So a lot of them have been digitized, but our public affairs, or now our communities and relations department, um, have a lot of the original photographs. And eventually, um, I I would like to myself, or have a seasonal or somebody go over there to scan all those millions of photos. But the ones that have been scanned and digitized um, are in our photo drive, basically here at the Fullersburg. And I don't think we have them displayed anywhere as of yet, but that would be a good idea to do.
Absolutely. Someone is asking, does the district conduct test digs at any other sites? And do you think the district will look for any other artifacts in the future?
That's a great question. We do not do any test dig sites. All these finds that we've had are just happenstance. They were just like, we just happened to find them, and we happened to be in the right place at the right time. I don't think there's been any effort to do any uh, uh, specific going out to find a mammoth skeleton or anything like that. So um, our for the forest preserve, our purpose is to preserve and protect, and we want to be able to provide ecosystems and habitats for wildlife to thrive. And so I don't think that's one of our goals to see if we can find more bones. But if in the process of restoring a wetland and we happen to find them, then yay.
Someone is asking, what did you study to become a naturalist?
That's an interesting question. My degree, actually, I went to Elmhurst College, and I have a bachelor's degree in geography and environmental planning, and I also have an environmental management degree. So in the geography end of things, I focused on like geographical landscapes. So that's where a lot of my glacial knowledge and stuff came from. I also did a lot of work on computer mapping and GPS and GIS stuff. So that got me into the forest preserve. Now, my naturalist career was formed when I was in Boy Scouts, because I was a Boy Scout camp leader for a number of years, and then B was when I was working on our resource management crew, which with um, folks that had a vast amount of knowledge. So I learned a lot on the job, really.
Uh, That's great. And someone is mentioning, just, as we are also interested in these types of things, Phillips Park in Aurora has a CCC pond where there were remains found from mastodon as well. Those bones are on display in the visitor center, they say. So not too far away in
Yeah.
Aurora.
Yeah, you'd be surprised if you look up of Chicagoland prehistoric megafauna or ice age megafauna finds, and you'll see they're all over the place, which is amazing because in this area you don't imagine those kind of things being found. And I always like my mind kind of blows when I think about it, is think about, well, what if they didn't go extinct? You'd be stopping your car to let a mammoth stroll by. And I think that'd just be a shocking thing, So
Just one or two other questions here. Are there ever any spearheads or arrowheads found alongside or in the bones of the mammoths?
So in these three areas that we were investigating, there are not any arrowheads or any signs of human contact with that animal. There have been, however, artifacts like arrowheads and things like that found in our forest preserves. In fact, there's a forest preserve near Blackwell that is Winfield Mounds, which was actually a Native American mound. I believe it was more of an artifact mound that did have artifacts in it at one time.
Okay, great. There's a question about opportunities for volunteers to help out with the forest preserve.
Yes, we have a lot of different opportunities for volunteers to do just about anything you can imagine with the forest preserve within reason. If you check out our website, dupageforest.org, um, that has a whole section on volunteering. So if you're interested in getting your hands dirty and helping out with some restoration type work, we have opportunities for that. If you like to be one who sits there and engages with uh, uh, the public, there's opportunities to do that as well. If you love working with grade school kids and leading them around in the woods, there's opportunities for that. So there's a lot of different things you can do as a volunteer, and as it's awesome experience and to be involved. And the nice thing about that too is that a lot of the volunteer opportunities are not huge commitments, so you can put in the time and feel satisfied by that and help out and do your part to help the environment.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. That's probably a good place for us to close. We certainly want to thank you, Dave, and the DuPage Forest Preserve for generously providing your time and effort to put this presentation together. As those of you who have registered for this webinar will receive the link to the Forest Preserve's website, which provides information about their sites and services, as well as upcoming programs and events. Dave also offered his contact information for additional questions and inquiries about other resources. If you are watching the recording of this presentation, you may request these links by emailing me at the library at ce@wheatonlibrary.org. That's CE for community engagement. The recording of this program will be available on the library's YouTube page within a week, and we'll be sending that link out. So there have been lots of thanks to you, Dave, for all of the time and this great information. Thank you so much for doing this for us. We certainly appreciate everyone's participation tonight. Great questions. Take care, everybody. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.